So if you've already purchased your Lickety Split sewing kit pack from me, you'll notice that you've received 42 1-inch hexagons. For the project that we're going to make across this weekend, we're only going to be making the pincushion together. So you'll need 19 of those hexagons, and the rest you can put aside because you'll be using them to make the front of the needle keep and the pincushion that's actually inside it. So set the rest aside and just pull out 19 today for the pincushion. Now, how do we know that they're 1-inch hexagons? If we grab a ruler and we take our hexagon, you'll see the side. If we look at the mark there, 1 inch to 2 inch, take a side of the hexagon and you'll see that it lines up perfectly there on those lines. And each of those sides, it doesn't matter which side that you measure, they'll all be exactly the same. So that's a 1-inch hexagon. Now, so the other thing I just want to point out to you before we go too much further is that if you have a look at your either on your pattern or on the sample that we've got here, we need to consider how if we used 1/2-inch hexagons, for example, they would be much smaller than these ones, and you would finish up with a smaller pincushion. If we so in order to make this pincushion, as I said, we need 19 hexagons, which means we need 19 pieces of fabric. Now, we have a few different options for our fabric. This one I made using 2.5-inch squares, and to get those 2.5-inch squares, I had a pack of 5-inch squares, which I cut in quarters. So that, well, if you were to cut the whole pack into quarters, you would end up with 168 because there's 42 5-inch squares. So if we were to take our hexagon paper and lay it on that 2.5-inch square of fabric, you'll see that it sits nicely inside that square. There's an edge of fabric all the way around it. So you don't need to cut your fabric into 2.5-inch squares to start with, but if that's what you've got, then that's great as well. So before we start with our pincushion, you have a think about what fabric that you might like to use. Here's an example of a similar shape that I've made, and the hexagons you'll see there in the pink have been fussy cut, and I'm going to show you how to do that shortly. But I want you to have a look at this block first of all. That it's exactly the same shape as is used in the pincushion, but it's actually called a Grandma's Flower Garden block. And I'm just going to show you a picture of how that's been used to make a quilt. There's a few different quilts on this picture, and so I'm just going to be using some leftover pieces of 1930s prints that I've got. I just had some small pieces there, and I'll be using those to make the pincushion this weekend. But while we're here, I'd like to show you how to do some fussy cutting, and that's what this is called when you've got your hexagon with a particular design repeated in the same manner on each of those hexagons. So it's called fussy cutting, and in order to do that, we need to make a template. So with a piece of, it's just a piece of plastic, but you can buy this in sheets. What we're going to do is put one of our hexagons, and I just use a little bit of double-sided tape to hold it on there. Make sure we leave plenty of room around it, and with our ruler, I think I've probably got a 1/4 inch there. We just need to make sure that we've got a good 1/4 inch on each, and I'm just going to use a pen to mark out a 1/4 inch. Now, and remembering not to use your good fabric scissors, we'll cut that template out, and we'll just peel off the paper and take the sticky tape off, and we're left with our template then. Now, what we need to do with this, I've got a similar piece of fabric here. What we're going to do is find a flower that's in the right place and center your plastic template over the top of that flower. And just with your pen, the same one that you used to cut out, we're just going to put a ring around that center of that flower, so that we know when we repeat it that is going to go over the center of the flower. Now with my friction pen, I'm just going to, while I'm holding it down there, just going to trace around my template, and then I'll find that flower in another area of that fabric, and see my circle there, pop that over the center of the flower again, and repeat those. And I would do that for as many hexagons as I needed. So in this case, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all exactly the same. Now, what you will have noticed from doing that with this piece of fabric is that we have traced 2, but what we've got is a lot of fabric that's in the middle that we won't be using. So what you will notice, of course, then is that if you're going to fussy cut, you're going to end up with a lot of fabric that gets wasted because you can't use every inch of the piece of fabric. So simply cut out along those lines then, and you would use your fabric that way if that's what you choose to do. But as I said, today we're just going to use some of the 1930s pieces that I have, and these are all just you know, small prints, so we don't need to fussy cut any of them because it doesn't that doesn't matter which part of the fabric gets used. The print is all over them. Now the good thing about English paper piecing is that you don't need to have your pieces cut exactly the same way, unless of course you're doing fussy cutting and you need your center to be in the same place all the way around. You don't need each piece to be exact. So all we need to do here, what I've done is layered 3 or 4 pieces in my hand. Use your template, use your paper, and you're going to need to have at least 1/4 inch around the outside. So if you're feeling confident about that, you just need your fabric scissors this time, and you can simply cut your hexagon shape, making sure that you've got a good 1/4 inch around the outside edge of your papers. That's pretty generous actually. It might be a little bit too big, but you'll see what I've done there. So just go through. Okay, so we should now have 19 pieces of fabric that we're going to use to cover our 19 hexagons. Before we do that, I'll get you just to pick up your first hexagon and just have a little feel around the edge. It's important that you become familiar with the feel of that edge of paper, because when we lay it on our paper and we start getting our fabric over the paper, we need to make sure that we can feel that crease. It's really important when you're English paper piecing that you maintain sharp, crisp lines, because what we want is that fabric to be as close to that paper as we can possibly get it. It's a bit like jigsaw puzzle pieces. They won't fit together if they're got bumps or lumps or things on them that don't belong. So just become familiar with what that actually feels like. If you'd like to glue baste your hexagons, you can get a fabric glue stick. This one is a Sue Daly one. Soline also have a fabric glue stick, and the glue is designed for fabric, and it's washable and it will dissolve, and it's easy to get out. Get the papers out once you've glued them in, because it's designed for use with the hexagon or with the paper pieces. So a couple of things to note about this. Just simply screw up the glue that you're using. It is refillable. There's always refills available. So to make it nice and simple, you can just put a little bit of glue on the back of your paper and put your paper in the center of your fabric, just like that. And what you need to be careful of when you're putting your glue on here is that you don't want to get your glue on the edge of your paper. So we're just going to put a line, just a single line of glue across that paper there. And the reason why we don't put too much is because the glue that you put in there, you've got to get your paper, you've got to get the paper out of the fabric, and the more glue that you put on, the harder that will be. So just running from the fabric across the next piece of paper, making sure that you push your fabric across onto the paper, and that once again your edge stays nice and crisp and close to as close as you can get it to the paper piece, and that your corners are nice and sharp. So just a single line, not on the edge, and fold the fabric over, bearing in mind again that your corners are going to be facing the same direction. Single line of glue, fold your fabric over, keeping it away from the edge. And the reason we keep it away from the edge of the paper is because we're going to be stitching on those edges, and it will be very difficult to stitch if you actually have glue in there. And you'll see that was so much quicker than the thread basting. Just making sure that your edges are all pushed down nice and sharp, corners, crisp edges. So you shouldn't have any lumps or bumps. They should all be smooth. Okay, so go ahead and glue baste. If you have a glue pen, go ahead and glue baste the rest of your hexagons. Once we've got that done, we'll come back and have a look and see how to lay them. Okay, so once you've got your 19 hexagons all beautifully basted, whether you've thread basted or glue basted, lay them out in a pattern that you're happy with. And what the pattern that you're going to have, I would suggest that you start with this hexagon in the center. Remembering, if we go back to our sample, the hexagon in the center will be the one that will have the button, and then this second row will be the ones that where you'll end up seeing all of the fabric. So starting with the one in the center, I always start with the one in the center, and then working on the next row around, and you'll see what I've done there. I've alternated a green and a blue. That's the main piece, and then I've put the other hexagons in around the outside, bearing in mind, and this will be something for you to remember when you go on to make the other two pieces in the pattern, that this will actually be made into a circle shape for your pin cushion. So part of these outside edge ones are going to get cut off. So what you could have actually done, and we haven't done it here because it's easier to keep it simple while we're only learning, but what we could have done was actually made some of these pieces half hexagons. And if you have a look in the pattern, you will actually see which ones could have been half hexagons, because they will be cut off and they will be cut exactly in half. But it is something to consider when you're becoming a bit more familiar with it, but we haven't worried about it for now. So as I suggested, we start with the center one, and then we lay out the next row, or the circle around the hexagon, center hexagon. But another way that you can look at this pattern is that this is a row of 3, that's a row of 4, the center row has 5 hexagons, and then we come back to another row of 4 and then a row of 3. So what we're actually going to be doing is joining these hexagons together in rows. We could join them together in circles, but it's much easier for this if we join them together in rows. So before we do that, I just wanted to talk about the what we're going to use to join them. So with your English paper piecing, a key to it, because it's hand stitching, the aim of it is to make sure that you can't see your stitching between the hexagons. So we want to keep it well hidden. And there are a couple of keys to doing that. And the first one is to use the right needle. And the ones that I normally would use are the Sue Daly milliner's needles. The milliner's needles are very, very thin needle, and they ideal for doing your English paper piecing because they don't leave a big footprint in the fabric. They take tiny little stitches and make it much easier for you. The other key is to use a lightweight thread. Now I use an 80 weight thread, and it comes in a range of colours. So choose one that's best suited for your project. And I would normally do that by just laying a few colours across the shapes that I'm going to be stitching together. This one is mostly a white background anyway, so it would make sense to use that one. The alternate probably would be a cream, and you'll be able to see which one blends in better. This one almost disappears better into the fabric across there, particularly those colours, but I think I'll use the white one. So we'll just thread up our needle. You'll just need a single strand of thread, and once again, if you purchased the kit, you will have a thread sample in that kit. Hopefully you've got something there that will go with your fabric selection. Okay, so I'll just thread up this this needle. So starting with going to use one of these actually, and the reason why I'm choosing this one is because it's got a gold eye and just a little bit easier to see the eye of the needle. With your thread, put the just going to snip the end of that on a point, make it a bit easier, and we bring the needle up to the thread and want about from your hand to your elbow's length. And once again, quilt is not in the end, so winding it around your needle 2 or 3 times, holding the thread on the needle and pulling the needle through, so you're actually holding that knot in your hand and bringing that down. So we're going to start by stitching these first 3 together. Pick up those 2 hexagons and hold them together with your corners lined up. Oh. Okay, I use a binding clip, quilter's binding clip, to hold it together, and the reason for doing that is because it just takes the pressure off your hands, otherwise you're tempted to hold it too tightly. Okay, now with your needle, see where you've got the fold of your fabric there, put your needle up under there so that when you pull it through, your knot goes underneath the fold. Now what I'm going to do is actually change to a different color thread so that you can see the stitching really clearly. Okay, so I've just changed to a different color thread so that you can see this a bit easier. My needle's gone up through the fold in the fabric, remembering to keep your edges together and your corners together, and we've got the binding clip there holding it. So up through the fold so that you're not, shouldn't come through, but we pull it up into there. Okay, what we're going to be doing is actually called a whip stitch, and we're going to be going over and over the top, but you'll need to be very careful that you're only going through the fabric. So if you think about the fabric threads at the top of your paper, the very top edge being the first thread, we don't want to be through that first thread, because what would happen is if we were to pull it, it would pull a hole. So we want to be in the second thread down, so it's still between the paper and the fabric, but we just need to stitch through. And because we're in the corner, we're going to secure it nice and tightly, and I would do that just by putting a little extra knot in the corner. And then from there we're going to be, just as I said, doing, it's called a whip stitch, just over and over. Now making sure that you keep it in a straight line, so the thread will go from one side to the other and not in an angle, but just like think about the rungs of a ladder. They're completely even, otherwise you'd fall off if they were a bit lopsided. But by doing our stitches straight across, it helps to make them less visible on the outside. So continuing all the way up there. Now, how close do our stitches need to be? If we think of an inch, we should have at least probably 12 to 15 stitches in that inch. It's nice little ones, sticking between the fabric and the paper, keeping them in a straight line, straight across, not on an angle like this, but straight across. When you get up to that corner, we're going to secure it again with a couple of extra stitches. Making sure that you get right up to that very far corner, because that will be the place where it will be tempted to come undone if you haven't secured it nice and tightly. When you undo it, take your clip off, because you will have used a nice thread that matches your fabric, you'll find that your stitches are largely hidden. So once again, you're making sure that you've got your papers lined up matching in the corners. Now what you can do, because we need to join this next hexagon onto the purple one, the green one onto the purple one here. Oh. Once you've finished that first row of 3, you can go through then and join or row of 4, and then your row of 5, and then your other row of 4, and then your final row of 3 hexagons. So all we're doing now is just joining each of these hexagons together in each row. So we're just going to join those edges. When we've got all that done, we'll come back and continue. Happy stitching.